Okay, ooh, we got our PC one going. Our Infinity version. Alright, so these next two chapters are related to each other. We are skipping chapter 18, which is on auctions and stuff, so just bear that in mind as if you start plowing through the homework. Don't jump into 18. So it's hopefully it's obvious on the syllabus. But give this a read for our opening segue. You see the screen okay, Jesse? You can nod if you can see it. Okay. I was kind of dealing with a situation similar to this here the last couple days. I've got some flooring that I bought from Sam's Club. That's kind of this put together laminate flooring. It's a nice quality stuff. It's not like the typical laminate that you can kind of tell. It's got individual planks and blah, blah, blah. We did it 2 years ago when we first put the house in, and now we've got this little section that we want to probably put that flooring down. So I go to Sam's Club, and they don't carry that same walnut that I bought from the Lenexa Sam's Club. So I go online and I look up the stuff, and it's Golden Select, and they do not sell it online. So they strictly deal with end user retailers, kind of similar to this problem is, right? So instead of having to deal with customers, then they only have to deal with Sam's Club. Sam's Club buys it, cheap, on lower margins so that they can mark it up and make their profit. But now this Golden Select company doesn't have to deal with people like me that are ticked off that it's bubbling up around the edges or whatever. So I'm not sure what I'm going to do at this point, but that company made a decision not to go into the retail part of life, right? But they were probably thinking the same thing. So like if I go into retail, and you can bet your bottom dollar that Sam Walton was on the other end of that. Of course, he's dead, but I mean, somebody on the Walmart side was saying, listen, we're going to buy a zillion of these flooring units from you, but you cannot sell them online yourself, right? I mean, that was part of their thing. So that's how they come in. They said, listen, we're going to buy it. And I can't find any other distributor. It looked like Costco sold it for a little while, and but they've made this conscious decision to just have an exclusive distributor of their product. So when they were making that decision, they didn't know everything, right? They're like, well, is Sam Walton bluffing? If I go retail, is he really not going to deal with me? And if he doesn't deal with me, could I go into Target or Kmart, or who's the other big fish in the pond that I could probably deal with if I don't make the Sam's Club deal, right? So how do we handle decisions like this? That's the real world where we start dealing with some uncertainty, right? So what do you do?
Just take a chance, right?
Okay, how? How do we, and that's a lot of what this chapter is about. How do we take a rational chance? Like, do we just plunge in, or is it something that we can calculate? I'll give you a hint. It's something that you can calculate. Super crunch it out, yes. Okay? So, how do we super crunch it out when we've got uncertainty? What's one of the first things that comes to mind when you've got a problem like this and you just don't know? What do you need to do? If you've got a lot at stake, this company had probably a lot at stake. Like, do we go with Sam's Club or do we not? Or do this particular company, are we going to lose our wholesalers if we go retail and sell directly to the public or not? So what do you as a person need to do What's your gut telling you that you need to do if you face a situation like this?
Consider your opportunity cost.
Okay, consider your opportunity cost. Good. Other things come to mind, definitely.
I talk to people that would be affected. See how they feel about it.
Absolutely. So talk to the stakeholders, who's all involved, right? Anything else come to mind? Okay.
I want to test it for you.
Okay. And then that might be all part of what goes back and forth across the table. Well, we won't do a year. We got to have a 10-year deal. That's the way we always do it. It's a boilerplate contract. Here, look. We've got vendors all over. All right. So what I'm hearing you guys look at your opportunity cost. Start talking to people. You're going to want to gather information, right? You're gathering data, gathering information. So that's really the first step in trying to assess how to go about this problem, is to get a good idea of what the probability of actually losing them is. How do you do that? You gather data, you super crunch it, you talk to people, you gather information. So as soon as you've gathered a ton of information, maybe as much information as you could really feasibly do, now you can start to maybe assess some probabilities of outcomes. So once you can do those probabilities, come on, clicker. Does this thing just need to be? Yeah, it might. I'll have to report it. I thought it was just sometimes if it's left off the crate. Oh. I bet it doesn't charge very well. Does this have to go in this gizmo, or does it just work magically if we just kind of touch it? Okay. Well, that's going to answer that problem. Let's see here. So maybe next time we'll have a charged up unit. This is the one that's kind of on a short leash here. Okay. It did work for a little bit. It must have a little stored energy in it. So, statistics 101. Remember that? Binomial random variable. Believe it or not, you guys have probably seen this. I guess maybe if, even if you majored in English, you might have seen something like that. You might not remember it, but you've likely seen something like that. So, insurance and decisions with uncertainty inevitably deal with probabilities of events happening. And so now we're going to start to talk about the expected value of that event by using these probabilities. So if the probability of getting x1 is 10%, 1 minus 10% is 90%. There's two possible outcomes. I've got a 10% chance of getting this, a 90% chance of getting this. Right? So that's how we calculate the expected values. If we get a little bit more complex and there's three things going on that we need to assess probabilities, we're going to have to identify two of them, and then one of them would be the remainder. So if this is 10%, this is 20%. 1 minus 10 minus 20 equals 70%. So we've got a 70% chance of getting this outcome, 20% chance of getting this outcome, 10% chance of getting this outcome. So just like kind of handling the roll of a die, the flip of a coin, we're going to put those probabilities on those events. Does anybody have any questions on this? We'll put a little more meat on the bones here in a second, but that's our basic framework.
Yes, I do.
Okay.
EX, what do you call that?
The expected value. So, kind of our working lingo here would be this is what this thing said. So this is the expected value of x. So whenever you see this E operator, also I guess sometimes I use this notation, the expected price or the expected income. So I may have done that. I try to be consistent, but sometimes I screw up. So the expected value of x. Okay. So after they've gathered some information, let's say that if they sell through the dealers like Sam's Club, the probability of losing large customers is 60%. And if they sell directly to large customers, the probability of losing the dealer distributors is 20%. So they've gathered enough information to try to think through that. So what I want you to calculate is the expected profit. So the probability that the distributors leave us, right, if we sell directly to large customers, we might lose our dealers. Does everybody understand this large customer dealer business? So one dealer has a huge buyer. So they always go to Sam's Club, right? And so, boy, they're like, you know, let's cut out the middleman. Let's cut out Sam's Club. I'll buy direct from you, just like my flooring company. Like if I'm with this Golden Select and I call them up and I say, hey, man, I just want to buy direct from you. You know, and you just cherry pick the huge buyers off. Well, that's going to tick Sam's Club off, and they might pull the plug on you or whatever. So that's what we're dealing with here. So we've got a 20% probability that the distributors leave, and the firm's profit will be only $30 million. It's just $30 here, but more fun to talk about millions. If the distributors stay, they get $130 million. So this is kind of a big deal if they lose their Sam's Club connection. Now, if we sell through just the dealers and the large customers say, man, if you can't cut me a deal, I'm out of here. I'm not working with Sam's Club anymore, right? So if they leave because you won't work with them directly and you determine that that's a 60% probability, you'll be left with $100 million. So you got a 60% chance of $100 million. And finally, if the large customers stay, so notice in both of these, the distributors stay, the large customers stay. If everybody stays and we have one big happy family, then we get 130. So calculate the expected profit under each scenario. Go. I'll come around and look. You are now calculating, figure out what's your x1, what's your x2, what's the probabilities, what is your expected profit. Expected profit. Good. So you might want to identify my expected profit if I sell only through the dealers. That's going to be one answer. So kind of use your notation, make sure you're being clear. Expected profit from selling directly to large customers. You can use some abbreviations, but you've got two things you're calculating.
Oh, that's
got me.
right here.
So I see a couple of you being a little sloppy. You will thank me later, even though you think I'm somehow maybe penalizing you now, to just lay things out. Take the time to put out the numbers. Not, you know, you can depend on how much, but put expected profit, you know, or whatever. So you might start off with, it's okay to use expected profit, maybe from, what do we got here? Directly large customers or dealers. So expected profit from LC, large is what? And then kind of lay out the formula. Let me see your paper, Jesse.
Well, it won't let me switch. What are you writing on the board? It won't let me flip it to see what you're writing on the board.
Oh. How come I won't let you do that? So you're looking
I don't know why.
You're looking at me right now on the screen?
Yeah.
Okay. And
Oh, wait, now it will.
okay.
Okay, there it is. Sorry.
I just wanted, when you get something, I'll go look at some other people's. I just wanted you to hold your paper up. I want to see what you're working on.
Okay.
Why, are you blank? Come on, I expect more out of you.
I have no idea what this part is. Would that be the second?
So you've got one probability of 60%,
right,
apparently, is what you're tracking here. So 1
I can only
minus
see
60%
the
is...
dealer side, so I'm doing the dealer side. But, what'd you say?
Okay, you're on the dealer side?
Yeah, because I can't see it.
All right, so you got 60% of 100.
Okay.
Oh, you can't see that.
I mean, I can if I stand up. That's
Well, you don't need that. That is easily remedied. How's that? So, if you've got a 60% chance of one, what's your chance of the other?
right, okay.
You only got 2 events.
Okay, so that's the whole separate deal?
Yep.
Okay. Well, I guess it means more. Alright. Never had like a P2
So if you've
on
got a
mine, it makes more
60%
sense.
chance of getting one event,
Right.
what's your percent of getting the other?
Yeah,
40. Good.
Is that right for the large customer?
For the large customers. Yep. Yep.
Okay.
Looks good.
I don't know if I'm doing it right. This one.
Okay. So large customers, you got, yeah.
Right?
1 minus, no,
Okay.
1 minus 0.2. It's the
Okay,
same
it's
probability. So that then
that's
you're going to get the
Okay.
80, yeah.
So then you have to do 2 different ones?
Yes. Yeah, they're both separate equations. So yeah, you'll
Okay.
you'll end up having 2 different answers. So you've got,
That's where I was confused.
yeah.
So the 1 minus the 0.2.
That's what gives you the
Right.
other result
That's
because
got
there's only 2.
But then with your next x, the x2, is that going to still be the, like if I'm working on the first one, is that going to still be the 30 or is that going to be the 130?
You're going to treat one or the other first completely separately.
Okay.
So if you choose to go sell to the dealers, you're running a risk of losing some or keeping both. If you choose to go this route, you're running a risk. The distributors might leave or you might get both. So they're both separate runs. Let me see your paper, Jesse. You need to, you've got the first part there of the large company with the 0.6. So where did you get the 0.6 from? Oh, you were on the dealers. For the large companies, you've got a 20% chance of the distributors leaving and only getting 30 versus the distributor staying and getting 130. So you're going to want to put it back into this equation of adding the 2 together. So stick to one or the other for starters. If you're coming down this tree, we'll work it out here in a sec, but hit it again. Did you guys calculate down to answers yet? Getting close. 1 minus 6. Okay, good. Yeah, you reset that well. Okay, good. And a lot of you did that. Okay. Yep. All right. So 110 and 112. All right, I'm going to rewrite it here on the board because sometimes it looks a little funky on the overhead. So for the large customers, expected profit, so we had a 20% chance of getting 30 million and an 80% chance of getting 130. For the selling to dealers only, we had a 60% chance of getting 100 and a 40% chance of getting 130. All right. So,
How does, like, okay, for example, the expected profit of the mortgage customer,
yeah,
how does that equally, I mean, I got the right answer,
okay.
but what I'm just wondering is how you just got that equation out of the top one.
Out of the top one, okay.
Yeah.
So, from the top one, we determined that there was a 20% chance they're going to leave, which means there's an 80% chance they're going to stay. So their P is the probability. This is actually a row. I can't remember if they did that way in the text, but it's a Greek letter rho is usually what that is. But P is the probability is 20%. 1 minus P then is 80%. So notice I'm flipping my language intentionally on 0.2 versus 20%. I look at that and think my brain works as 20%, but it's really 1 minus 0.2 is 0.8, so don't let that throw you. So probabilities, one of the things that we know about probabilities is that if you have all the probabilities of different events, they have to sum to 1 or 100%. We have to factor in all the possibilities of things happening. Okay, did that help, Gabby? Is that what you're looking for? Anything else?
I think it helped. I was putting the second, it's like 0.8.
Yeah.
I was putting that up to the second.
Right, you weren't alone. That's what some other people were doing too. Okay, and the reason you need to kind of know that is that in a problem that you guys will probably do here for the next homework, it might just say the probability of leaving is 20%. What's the expected value? So they're not going to tell you that it's 80. You just have to know, oh, if it's 20% for that event, it must be 80% of it actually happening. Okay?
So will all of the never be otherwise stated?
Yes. Yep. Yeah, the two events will sum to 1 unless there's something else in the problem. Okay, so the big question is, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? Go with the dealers, okay? So this is bigger than this, so it's the best thing to do. Okay, and this particular problem, it's kind of close, right? With 110, 112. This is kind of nice that you either end up with 100 or 130, so that kind of feels good. So if I would have changed this to make this a little bit heavier, I'm not going to math it out, but let's just say that $40 instead of 30 raises this to be $113. Now that would suggest that it's better to go with this than this. But this one has a worse outcome than this. So that's where it gets kind of dicey on dealing with expected values. Do I like it well enough? Do I have other strategies besides expected values? That's kind of where we're taking this lecture between this chapter and the next chapter, is starting to think about those numbers. But on the face of it, this is more than this, so I should sell only to the dealers.
You have to think like, okay, that's only a $2 difference or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you're like, all right, they're close, and that one's better. But if the other one's outcome, or possible outcome was so much worse, you have kind of like weigh thoughts and say,
Possibly, yes. I think what that would come down to is how comfortable are you with the probabilities? And then what you were alluding to is, can you live with the worst outcome?
right.
So if this makes you bankrupt, then maybe that's not a good idea to chase, right? So if we're not dealing with that surplus bonus money, if this means that your workers don't get paid and you go bankrupt by rolling the dice, even though this, and I'm not, this isn't a good illustration, but let's just say this was 130 versus 112. But the outcome was 30 means you go bankrupt. You got to factor that in. Can I live with that outcome or not? So that's where we start thinking about the payoffs. And then the other thing you're maybe touching on is how comfortable am I with these probabilities? If this is really 112 versus 110, are they really the same and it's a coin flip, right? Because, well, are you sure this wasn't 0.19 and 8.81, How good, how tight was that probability? And so then you might do some sensitivity analysis like, well, where did this probability come from? Does that really make sense? So yes, gets into the art form of decision making on how much faith we put into that probability number. Okay, so we're going to look at pricing in this example. We talked about price discrimination and high-value customers and low-value customers. So let's say we've got some high-value people willing to pay 8, some low-value people willing to pay 5. And suppose that there's equal numbers in each group. So imagine that there's 100 consumers, and we're just going to arbitrarily say, suppose we got about 50 of them are the high-value people, 50 of them are the low-value people. And how do we go about pricing? So if the marginal cost is $3 of your good, what's the optimal price? What do we set our price at? We've talked a lot about pricing. Sometimes we have that marginal revenue equals marginal cost, but if marginal revenue is greater than marginal cost, then that means we need to increase the quantity and drop the price or raise the price, right? So we kind of talk about these pricing strategies, and now we've got this problem here with half the consumers being at 8 and half being at 5. So just to get the juices flowing here a little bit, if we price it at 3, how much money do we make? None. How much do we sell? All of it. Good. So we get both the low value and the high value people. So if we price it at 5, did the high value people buy it? Yes. Right? And so do these guys. And if we price it at 8, we get half the market, right? So that's where we're going with this, is kind of thinking about how many people are we going to sell to and what the optimal price is. So what if we start to think about the percentages or the chances of selling? So by pricing high, you'd earn $5 per sale. In other words, you get it 50% of the time. So just cutting it in half, I wanted you to mentally work through that first, that if we price it at 5, we'd get half the market. But now we're going to kind of flip the switch a little bit and say, well, we're going to sell 50% of the time, because maybe in our store, if there's 10,000 people that live in Ottawa, on a given day, if I have the ability to change prices, I don't know who's going to walk into my store on a given day, right? So am I going to get the high-value people today? Well, it's Friday. I hope I'm going to get the high-value people, or a bunch of low-value people going to come in because it's Tuesday and it's sale day or something.
And it's Ottawa.
And it's Ottawa, yes. So that always throws the extra ringer in there. But so now we start thinking, okay, well, I got a 50-50 shot of getting a high-value person or a low-value person. So it kind of changes our thinking a little bit on who's going to walk in the door. All right, so if you price low, you'd earn $2 per sale, but would get 100% of the market. So now we can think about the expected price. And this is where it'll get a little dicier on the logic. So if we price high, and we think about the probabilities, I've got a 50% chance of getting a $5 profit because it's half the market. So I'm going to sell to those high value customers and get a $5 profit. Or I'm going to get 0 if they don't come in to my store, right? So if all the low value people come in and I've got it priced at $8, I'm screwed. I don't sell any. So my expected price, thinking about this 50-50 shot of who's going to walk into my store, is $2.50. If I price low, I know I'm going to sell to everybody, right? So I've got a 50% chance of making $2. Marginal cost was 3, so 5 minus 3 is 2. I've got a 50% chance of selling to the other. In other words, I got a 100% chance here of getting $2, the whole market. So how should I price? Price high or price low? High, right? So we got the 250 on pricing high, so we want to price high. So back to negotiations here in the car sales room. Do people always pay the same price for a brand new car? No. Okay. So just want to make sure we're all on the same. We all know what we're talking about here. So that doesn't go on very often. So how do they do the discrimination? What have you seen, those of you who bought cars, or maybe you've gone in with a friend or somebody else, mom and dad were buying a car. Tell me about their tactics. What do they do?
I don't really need a new car. I like it, but it's not really the color I like or the options that it has.
Okay, now you're on the buying side, right? Okay, so what about the salespeople? What are they doing on their end? You're right, that would be the good things to do.
The actual sales.
Yeah, salespeople. Right, I'm talking about the actual kind of tactics in the sales room.
Before, after they run their credit.
Good question. I'd say that's part of the process, isn't it? Well, let me run your credit first before we go, because we would sometimes do that in the under different circumstances in the rental business. You know, do you run the credit check first, or do you do it later? Or when you're pre-approving a loan, you know, have you run the people through the loan process? When you're a salesperson in real estate and somebody calls you up and says, yeah, I saw this house at 3624 Orchard Lane, and I was wondering about seeing that. And, you know, I maybe didn't have all the inventory up, and I look it up, and I'm like, oh, $235,000 house, jackpot, you know? So, oh, well, yeah, what time would you like to get together? Saturday or Sunday? You know, what would look? Well, this is a young couple. They don't know their head from their toe, and they can only afford a $120,000 house, right? They can't afford a $235,000 house. So you learn that early on in the real estate business to do a little bit of this screening too. So back to the car example, what else are they doing? That's a good one though, run it before or after the credit. So they could run the credit before they really sit down and talk to you even, right? So that's a good one.
You're trying to figure out if you're going to pay a lot or if you can't pay
Yes.
very much.
Yep.
You're gonna put down a down payment.
Yeah, I just saw them getting a little better.
A lot of times they look at appearance, what you can.
Yeah.
Okay.
Drive there.
Yep.
What you drive there, yeah, that's a good one.
Do you always They look at previous history if you've purchased vehicles with in the past.
Okay, that's good to get a feel for you on that. Yeah. What did you drive in the past? Yeah. Huh. Getting a low battery on. Yeah, on the iPod, but it's all plugged in. But you know what? I didn't totally charge it up. Maybe it's not a fully functioning. So, okay, we'll just write it out here. Good. What else? You guys said some good things. Jesse, I'm sorry. You probably couldn't hear a lot of that, right?
I heard some of it.
You heard some? Okay. So it's just some of the things. Did anything come to mind for you on what they do? you guys get to the point where you've actually started negotiating? What do they do when you've maybe thrown a price at them? And
Well, they say, well, I don't make any money out of it, just giving you this price because I like you.
yeah, so you might hear some cheap talk like that. Yeah.
I like it.
Because
Right.
I like you, you're a guy.
Well, I'm not making a dime off of this. We paid X or whatever. Okay.
I need to talk to my manager.
Keep your keys. I need to talk to my manager. That's the one I was kind of thinking of, right? So it's always this big gnarly monster behind the big wall that, well, it's just such a low offer. I'll have to fight my manager, right? You know, so they've kind of played this good cop, bad cop thing is another thing that they.
We had one where we dropped off our car to be serviced, and they told us it was going to cost $4,000 to get repaired.
Yeah.
So we ended up buying a new car from them. We were young and stupid.
Yeah. Yeah.
You guys in there, don't ever do that.
Right. Yep, that happened. Yeah, that they do. That's not uncommon at all in a number of different things, whether it's a lawnmower or something else. So, so they make you wait. They kind of do different things, and what they might be doing is trying to sort you out into whether you're a high value customer or a low value customer. So, if you're a high value customer, let's say you're a kind of a high income person and, you know, price isn't as important. When you go into that negotiation, are you going to be a real hard negotiator in general? No, right? So think of it this way. They might actually make you wait. They make kind of everybody wait because high value people won't want to wait, right? They're kind of impatient with it. I'll pay it anyway. It's not that important to me. What's a couple $1,000, right? That kind of attitude. And so it's actually strategic on their part to make you wait. And so if the high value customer comes in, they more quickly come to terms and we don't have to play the little Mickey Mouse game of going back to talk to the manager and come back and forth. So that can be a sorting mechanism on trying to figure out who the high value customer people are and who's the low value.
Wait, so why would it be wait? Like if you're gonna pay more, why would it?
So the high value customer won't want to wait. Their opportunity costs are too high. I've got a court case to go. I'm doing a surgery here in an hour. I got to get out of here. I just want to buy this Mercedes. Just put it on my tab. I'm out of here. You know, that type of thing. So they make everybody wait because you don't have to wait if you just say, I'll take it, right? That salesperson, they're not going to, you don't go through this slow process of, well, I got to check with my manager. And if you could just wait here, I'll give you a cup of coffee and a soda and a couple of cookies. And here's a video to watch for your kids in the little waiting room. All that kind of stuff could be a tactic. Okay. So that kind of gets into this this price discrimination concept, and this is a direct form of price discrimination or indirect? Indirect, right? So we're not able to identify necessarily who the high value people are and who the low value people are. So what can you as a customer do to defeat some of these schemes, or what might you have to do? Wait. So you got to wait like everybody else, even though you could pay it, but you kind of know that they do this, so you can wait a little bit.
Going at the end of the month.
How do you dress if you're a rich person that still likes to get deals when you go in? Was it you, Ryan, that brought up how you dress, or how do you dress when you go?
You can look decent, but not like you're making money.
Yeah. All right. So you kind of play the game a little bit. I've got a Jaguar that's an older one. It's a 2000, but it's still a Jaguar. And then I've got this 1997 Ford Aerostar minivan. I don't know if you guys have seen it, but it's kind of rusting out on the bottom. And so I've got this little policy in life that when I go garage sailing, I don't go with the Jag, right? So you got to kind of play the part. I put on the ruggedy clothes and the shorts, and I'm here to wheel deals. See, look at my vehicle I'm driving. It's a rust bucket. So everybody should have a beater when it comes down to negotiating. Do you drive the Aerostar or do you drive the Jag? Sometimes you need to drive the Jag, by the way, right? Because if you need to convey a little bit of something or other in a certain circumstances, you might need to drive. So you need both vehicles. Sorry, when you guys get to the point where you need a couple vehicles, you don't need a super nice, two nice vehicles. You need a beater and you need a nice vehicle. That puts you in a good position depending on how you show up to the show. It's not about appearances that need to be kept up 100% of the time. Those are the people that are broke typically, by the way, right? Those are the broke people that have the nice stuff on all the time and the hair's always perfect and they smell good and they have all the latest and the greatest and the fanciest, and those are usually the broke people. They're not the rich people. I've over the last 20 years, it's been interesting getting in the real estate business, and I met lots of millionaires, and those are not the millionaires. The millionaires are kind of simple dressed, and they're just kind of the regular old Joe. That's usually your millionaire walking around. Okay, so point is here that you can, if you know that companies are up to that type of stuff, you can kind of be the wolf in sheep's clothing. Okay, why don't you give this a read? This touches a little bit on what Skylar was talking about earlier. You know, maybe we need to look at what the worst case scenario is if we don't do something. So if we don't take action, what's going to be the hurt? What's going to be the, you know, what's going to help? What's the gain? What's the loss? And so we can start to look at the cost of making an error. So there's what's known as a type 1 and a type 2 error. So one is you make a decision, and the decision you made ends up being the wrong one. Like in hindsight's 2020. You're like, oh man, that was the worst person I could have ever hired, right? So I hired Uncle Joe, and I thought it was going to be a good move, but he turned out to be a loser and lazy and stole a bunch of money. Whoops. That's one type of error. A different type of error is the person you didn't hire, right? So there was other people that you could have hired, but you looked over the list and you're like, well, I see we got Uncle Joe and we got Sarah and Barry, and you know, Sarah's kind of a close second, but I'm going to go with Uncle Joe, right? So you skipped over Sarah, and it's possible that Sarah would have been the best employee you've ever had, but you don't know that, right? So you made an error by not selecting Sarah as much as you might have made an error by selecting Uncle Joe. So it's the thing you didn't do that could have been possibly an error, but you'll never really know that. So that's what we're going to look at here with probabilities. So global warming is not a far-gone conclusion, if you don't know that there's some debate out there on whether or not certain activities are going to cause the imminent crushing of human beings on planet Earth or not. So we can start to think of, well, what if we're wrong, what if we're right? So we can kind of curtail some of the harm that's being done to the environment by imposing some taxes. Because what we learned in econ class is that if you tax something, people tend to do less of it, right? So we put on a carbon tax, and people will not pollute as much. And so that's one way we could help save the environment, by taxing. But the problem is if it turns out that we're not doing any harm anyway with the carbon, that there was some measurement error, you know, whatever the case is, then that tax was pretty wasteful. And we had a lot of lost opportunities by curtailing an activity that didn't matter anyway. So type 1, type 2 errors is what we're thinking about. And we've got the probability that global warming is caused by human activity, 1 minus that probability, is that it's not yet, right? So if there's a 10% chance that that's caused by human activity, there's a 90% here. If there's a 99% chance that it's I don't know what the percentages are, then it's only 1% here. But then we can think about the outcomes associated with each. Okay. Questions on that? So how do we find the optimal thing to do? So we maximize the expected benefit before. We picked 112 instead of 110 here. So the expected benefit was 112 from going with the dealers versus staying with the large customers. So we chose this. Now we're going to minimize the error. So if the expected error of going one way is less than the other, then that's what we're going to do. So instead of maximizing the benefit, we're going to minimize the error. Let's try to minimize the impact. To bring this back to pricing, this last comment here, does anyone want to take a stab at what that means? So this type of analysis is especially useful for balancing the risk associated with pricing errors. I price too high, I price too low. Is it better to price too high or is it better to price too low for airlines, hotels, cruise ships? Why are those brought up? What comes to mind when you hear those industries? Hotels, cruise ships, airlines. What's that? Overpriced, so they're a high-priced item. Capacity, right. So we talked about capacity. Once we get to that break point, there's only 50,000 seats at the stadium. If I price too high, I've missed out. If I price too low, I sell the place out, but I might have missed out on other opportunities, right? So you could use this type of analysis to look at that. Well, like, what if I go too high? How much do I lose by having empty seats? And if the marginal cost, is the marginal cost high or low with these type of industries? Marginal cost compared to average cost or average total cost. It's low, right? So that's what the hotel room, what do we have? We gotta have somebody go in and clean up the room. Very minimal marginal cost to it. Even if the hotel costs $40 billion to make, well, 40 billion is a little high. $40 million hotel to make, the marginal cost might be fairly low. Okay. So, can anybody put that into words for me? Especially the uncertainty part. So this is something that's confused all the time. I've even textbooks don't necessarily take the same approach. Sometimes they treat risk and uncertainty as the same thing. Well, you're taking on a risk. Well, there's uncertainty or whatever. They're kind of the same thing. But this text, as well as other, kind of take a little bit different approach on how we look at risk versus uncertainty. About the here, you could substitute possibly the amount, but why?
No, I'm saying it says uncertainty about the.
Oh, yeah. That edit, yes. Sorry. That is a typo. Is uncertainty about the distribution. So there's two about those. Get rid of that one.
So it's when there's more than one possible outcome for a decision?
No. But I'm glad you brought that up. So if we add there could be more than one possible outcome dealing with uncertainty or more with risk. So if we have the probability of event 1, the probability of event 2, and then it's 1 minus the probability of one or the other. So we can deal with, there's a 20% chance, a 30% chance, and a 50% chance of 1. What did we need to do when we were trying to assign the probability? Ryan kind of brought it up and we kind of went off on that a little bit. What's that? Gather information. So we need information about it, right? Is it always possible to gather enough information to put a pretty good number down of 10%, 20%, 50%? No. Sometimes is it impossible to even gather enough information? Yes. That's uncertainty. When you cannot gather enough information to put together a probability, that's true uncertainty. So we get to this point where we've wrung out all the chance of something happening, and is there going to be lightning in Ottawa in the next 30 days? Most likely, right? And we can do some weather forecasts, but what about lightning 1 year from now? Can you put any probability on that? 1 year from today, that day, probably no way, right? Not, you can't even, like, oh, there's a 10% chance. Oh, there's a 1% chance. Oh, there's a 30%. You can't do it, right? There's not enough information out there to actually put a probability distribution. So if you tried to gamble in Vegas and said, hey, what's the chance of lightning showing up? You might be able to find somebody to take you on that, but you're going to have to pay them pretty big odds, right? So it's basically not predictable. And so it's the roll of a die. It's just gambling at that point. Whereas risks, we can assign some probabilities to, and it's not so much on the form of gambling. All right, let's take a break there. That's a good spot to get your juices flowing, because we're going to get into